Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Trust. Neil Weeks had always been a man of precision. In the mountains of Afghanistan, precision meant the difference between life and death. Every shot counted, every heartbeat measured, every breath controlled. As Team 6's most lethal sniper, he had 127 confirmed kills across 3 tours. But none of that mattered when he was holding his infant son, Ryan, watching Colleen sing lullabies in their small apartment in Virginia Beach. Colleen Gillespie had been the girl who waited. They'd met at a Navy recruitment event when she was 22, fresh out of college with dreams of teaching elementary school. Neil was 24 then, already marked for special operations, his granite jaw and steel gray eyes promising a life of danger she thought she could handle. They married after 6 months of whirlwind romance, and Ryan came 2 years later. "I know this isn't easy," Neil had told her before his 3rd deployment, cradling their 6-month-old son. "But after this tour, I'm done. We'll have enough saved to buy that house with the white picket fence you always dreamed about." Colleen had kissed him then, her auburn hair falling across his chest as she whispered, "I'll be here when you get back. We'll both be here." The irony wasn't lost on Neil that the same skills that made him a ghost in enemy territory, patience, observation, reading people, had completely failed him at home. He'd missed the signs. The way Colleen stopped asking about his missions. How her letters became shorter, more formal. The background noise during their video calls that didn't match their quiet neighborhood. But Richard Patton had been reading the signs perfectly. Richard owned Patton Security Solutions, a private military contractor that hired ex-soldiers for overseas operations. At 38, he was older than Neil by 6 years, with the kind of smooth confidence that came from never having to prove himself in actual combat. His service record showed 2 years in the Army before a convenient back injury led to a medical discharge and a hefty disability check that he'd leveraged into his security business. He'd met Colleen at a military wives support group, a predator circling wounded prey. While Neil was dodging Taliban bullets in Kandahar, Richard was playing the understanding shoulder to cry on, the successful businessman who could offer stability, the man who would never leave her alone for months at a time. "Your husband's a hero," Richard had told Colleen over coffee after their 3rd support session. "But heroes make terrible husbands. They're always chasing the next mission, the next war. A woman like you deserves someone who puts family first." Neil's commanding officer, Captain Gregory McCullough, had noticed the change in his sniper during the final weeks of deployment. The man who once joked with his spotter and shared pictures of his family had become silent, focused to the point of obsession. When Neil volunteered for a kitchen rotation, typically reserved for soldiers being disciplined, McCullough hadn't questioned it. Everyone dealt with deployment stress differently. Some men drank, some picked fights, some wrote letters home every day. Neil Weeks apparently found peace in preparing meals for 200 soldiers. McCullough had no way of knowing that Neil was monitoring every communication channel, reading every intelligence report, building a complete picture of the network of informants and contractors operating in their area. That's how Neil learned about the connection between Patton Security Solutions and the insurgent groups they were supposedly fighting against. Richard wasn't just stealing his wife. He was playing both sides of a war, selling information to whoever paid best. But Neil kept that knowledge to himself, filing it away like ammunition for a weapon he wasn't ready to fire. The call came during Neil's self-assigned kitchen duty on a Tuesday morning in October. He was alone in the prep area, methodically cleaning weapons that didn't need cleaning, when his personal phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Hello, Neil." Richard's voice was smooth, confident, tinged with the satisfaction of a man who thought he'd already won. "I think it's time we talked." Chapter 2. The phone call that changed everything. Neil's hand didn't shake as he held the phone. 3 years of sniper training had taught him to control every involuntary response, even when his world was crumbling. He listened to Richard's laughter, the cruel pleasure in the man's voice as he delivered each calculated blow. "Your pathetic mother is dead, and your brat is next." In the background, clear as a sniper's scope, Neil heard Ryan screaming, "Daddy, save me." The sound cut through his chest like shrapnel, but his voice remained steady. "What do you want, Patton? I want you to know that your wife doesn't need a coward anymore. She's got a real man now." Richard's voice grew closer to the phone, more intimate. "You sitting in that kitchen, playing house with the soldiers? Colleen told me about your little breakdown. how you can't handle the pressure anymore. Neil's mind cataloged every word, every inflection. Richard was calling from their home. He could hear the distinctive creak of the front porch in the background, the one Neil had been meaning to fix before deployment. The bastard wasn't just sleeping in his bed. He was making himself at home. "Let me talk to my son." "Your son?" Richard laughed again. "Ryan calls me daddy now. Has for months." Amazing how quickly kids adapt when they're not abandoned by their real fathers. The line went quiet except for the sound of movement. Then Colleen's voice came through, sharp and cold. "Don't come back, Neil. We don't need a coward." The words hit harder than any bullet Neil had ever dodged. This was his wife, the woman who'd promised to wait, the mother of his child, speaking with a voice he didn't recognize. But underneath the cruelty, Neil's trained ear caught something else: fear. Colleen was afraid, and that fear wasn't directed at him. "Mommy, I want to talk to Daddy." Ryan's voice was closer now, followed by the sharp sound of a slap and sudden crying. "Kids need discipline," Richard said, back on the phone. "Something you never learned to provide. Don't worry, though. I'm teaching him how to be a man." The call ended, but Neil didn't move from his position by the prep station. Around him, the base continued its daily operations, soldiers talking, equipment humming, the distant sound of helicopters landing. But Neil was somewhere else entirely, his mind shifting into the cold, analytical space that had made him the most feared sniper in Team 6. Captain McCullough found him there an hour later, still holding the silent phone. "Weeks? You missed chow call." Neil looked up, and McCullough stepped back involuntarily. He'd seen that expression before, in the moments before Neil took an impossible shot that no other sniper would attempt. It was the look of a predator who had found his prey. "Sir, I need to request emergency leave." "What's the situation?" "Family emergency." Neil's voice was flat, empty of emotion. "My mother died, and there are concerns about my son's welfare." McCullough studied his sniper's face. In 3 years of serving together, he'd never seen Neil request leave early, never seen him ask for special consideration. The man was reliable as clockwork, professional to a fault. But something fundamental had shifted. "I'll approve the leave," McCullough said finally. "But Weeks? Whatever you're thinking of doing back home." "I'm thinking of protecting my family, sir. The Neil Weeks I know protects people within the bounds of the law." Neil's smile was thin, dangerous. "The Neil Weeks you know never had someone threaten his child, sir." That evening, Neil made 2 phone calls. The first was to Jeremiah Salas, his former spotter who now worked private security in the States. Jerry owed Neil his life 3 times over and had always said he'd return the favor without questions asked. "I need surveillance on a house in Virginia Beach," Neil said without preamble. "Complete package, cameras, audio, movement tracking. And I need a full background workup on a man named Richard Patton." "How complete?" Jerry's voice was professional, understanding. "The kind that finds everything. Financial records, business associates, criminal history, personal habits. Everything. Timeline. Yesterday." The second call was to his mother's lawyer, confirming what he already suspected. Margaret Weeks had died of a heart attack 3 days ago. The funeral was scheduled for Friday. She'd left everything to Neil: her house, her savings, and something else that Richard Patton couldn't possibly know about. Margaret Weeks had been more than a devoted mother. She'd been a CIA analyst for 30 years, specializing in Middle Eastern operations. Her basement contained files that could end careers and start wars. More importantly, it contained detailed dossiers on every private military contractor operating in Afghanistan, including Patton Security Solutions. As Neil packed his gear for the flight home, he wasn't thinking about grief or reconciliation. He was thinking about the hunting traditions his grandfather had taught him as a boy in Montana. You don't just track your prey, you learn its habits, its weaknesses, its every move. You study it until you know it better than it knows itself. Then you wait for the perfect shot. Chapter 3. Homecoming. The funeral was held on a gray Friday morning at St. Mary's Catholic Church. Neil stood at the graveside in his dress uniform, the weight of his ribbons and medals feeling heavier than any gear he'd carried in combat. He watched the small crowd of mourners through dark sunglasses, cataloging each face, noting who attended and who didn't. Colleen wasn't there. Neither was Ryan. "I'm sorry for your loss, son." Father Jonathan Potter had known Neil since childhood, had presided over his wedding to Colleen. The priest's eyes were kind but troubled. "Your mother was a remarkable woman." She spoke of you often, worried about you constantly. Did she say anything else recently? About our family? Father Potter hesitated. She came to confession 2 weeks before she died. I can't share the details, but she was carrying a heavy burden. She mentioned being afraid for Ryan's safety. Neil's grandmother, Penny Weeks, approached as the last shovelful of dirt covered Margaret's casket. At 84, she was sharp as ever, her blue eyes missing nothing. That woman didn't deserve to be buried next to your grandfather, she said without preamble, gesturing toward the empty space where Margaret now lay. But she had her reasons for the choices she made. Come to the house tonight. There are things you need to see. The Weeks family home sat on 5 acres outside Virginia Beach, a sprawling farmhouse that had belonged to the family for 4 generations. Neil had grown up here, learned to shoot in the back 40, spent summers helping his grandfather repair everything from tractors to radios. Now it felt like returning to a different world. Jeremiah Salas was waiting in the kitchen, a laptop open on the scarred wooden table where Neil had done his homework as a child. Jerry looked older than his 32 years, his left arm still slightly stiff from the shrapnel that had ended his military career. Got your intel package, Jerry said, sliding a thick folder across the table. Your boy Richard is interesting reading. Neil opened the folder and began scanning the documents. Financial records showed Patent Security Solutions was highly profitable, with contracts throughout the Middle East and Africa. But the profit margins were too high, the client list too diverse. Nobody made that much money in legitimate security work. He's running weapons, Neil said, reading between the lines of innocuous shipping manifests and client agreements. Gets better. 3 of his employees have been arrested for arms trafficking in the past 2 years. All 3 died in custody before trial. Very convenient. Neil flipped to the surveillance photos Jerry had taken. Richard and Colleen at dinner, Richard picking up Ryan from school, Richard in Neil's driveway washing Neil's car. The bastard wasn't just stealing his family. He was erasing him entirely. There's something else, Jerry said quietly. Your boy's got a history with military wives. Found 3 other cases in the past 5 years. Same pattern. Targets deployed soldiers' families, moves in on the wives, gains access to the houses. Looking for what? Information. Equipment. Access codes. Your average soldier doesn't have much worth stealing, but special operations guys? They've got contacts, clearances, knowledge that's worth real money to the right buyers. Neil's blood went cold. His home office contained classified materials, tactical manuals, contact information for assets across 3 continents. If Richard had access to that intelligence, how long has he been in my house? Based on the surveillance? At least 6 months. But Neil, there's something else you need to see. Jerry opened his laptop and showed Neil a series of audio files. I placed listening devices yesterday while they were out. This was recorded this afternoon. Richard's voice filled the kitchen. The transfer happens tomorrow night. Ahmed's people will take delivery at the warehouse, and our Afghan contact confirmed the shipment manifest includes the special items. Colleen's voice, barely recognizable. What if Neil comes back early? What if he finds out? Neil's not coming back. And even if he did, what's he going to do? Report me? With what evidence? He's got no proof of anything. But his mother's funeral. His mother's dead, his wife hates him, and his kid thinks I'm daddy. Neil Weeks is finished. Tomorrow night, we complete the last shipment, and then we disappear. You, me, and Ryan. New identities, new life, more money than we could spend in 3 lifetimes. The recording continued, but Neil had heard enough. They weren't just stealing his family. They were planning to kidnap his son and disappear forever. Penny Weeks appeared in the doorway, moving silently despite her age. Jerry, would you give us a few minutes? After Jerry left, Penny led Neil down to the basement. Behind a false wall that Neil had never known existed, she revealed Margaret's private office. The room was lined with filing cabinets, multiple computers, and communication equipment that belonged in a government facility. Your mother wasn't just a CIA analyst, Penny said. She was running assets, coordinating operations, managing intelligence networks across 4 continents. When she retired, she kept working privately. Some of her contacts became very wealthy men with very dangerous enemies. Neil opened one of the files and found detailed surveillance reports on Richard Patent dating back 18 months. Margaret had been watching him, documenting his activities, building a case. She knew about Colleen's affair? She knew Richard was targeting your family specifically. Not for romance, for intelligence. Your security clearance, your contact network, your knowledge of special operations protocols. Margaret tried to warn Colleen, but the girl wouldn't listen. At the bottom of Margaret's file was a single sheet of paper, a handwritten note addressed to Neil. If you're reading this, they've made their move. The weapons shipment tomorrow night will include chemical weapons components stolen from army stores. Ahmad Hassan's cell intends to use them against American targets. Stop them. Save Ryan. Make them pay. Mom. Neil closed the file and looked at his grandmother. Did she have a plan? Penny smiled, and for a moment Neil saw where he'd inherited his capacity for cold calculation. Your mother always had a plan. The question is, are you prepared to be the man she raised you to be? Neil thought about Ryan's screams on the phone, about Colleen's cold dismissal, about Richard's laughter. He thought about 127 confirmed kills and what it meant to be a protector. Yes, ma'am. I am. Chapter 4, The Art of War. Dawn came gray and cold to the Weeks farmhouse, but Neil had been awake for hours, studying his mother's files by lamplight. Margaret's intelligence network was extensive: contacts in law enforcement, military contracting, international arms dealing, and darker corners of the intelligence world. Each contact was rated by reliability, capability, and what favors they owed. The most interesting entry was for a man named Andres McKenzie, listed simply as the cleaner, level 5 asset, unlimited authorization. Neil dialed the encrypted number at precisely 0600. McKenzie Logistics. The voice was gravelly, professional. This is Eagle 7. I'm calling in Margaret's marker. A pause. Eagle 7 has been confirmed dead for 3 years. Eagle 7 was never dead. Eagle 7 was just working under a different name. Check your authentication protocols. Another pause, longer this time. Authentication confirmed. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Weeks. Your mother was a remarkable woman. I need a clean entry team, surveillance equipment, and extraction capabilities. Target is domestic, time-sensitive, involves child endangerment and international arms trafficking. Timeline: 18 hours. Budget: Neil looked at his mother's bank statements. Margaret Weeks had been more than careful with her money. Unlimited. I'll have a team at your location by noon. Jerry returned at 0800 with fresh surveillance reports and a grim expression. They moved Ryan to Patton's warehouse compound last night. The place is locked down tight. Cameras, motion sensors, armed guards. Neil studied the aerial photographs Jerry had obtained. Patton Security Solutions operated out of a converted aircraft hangar surrounded by razor wire and guard towers. It looked more like a military base than a business. Guard rotation: 6-man teams, 4-hour shifts. All former military, armed with assault rifles. They're not playing around. Weaknesses: loading dock on the east side has a blind spot. Drainage tunnel runs underneath the property from the old airfield. And Jerry hesitated. One of the guards is someone we both know. Neil looked at the personnel files Jerry had compiled. The name hit him like a physical blow. Franklin Wiggins, his former teammate from Team 6. Franklin had been discharged 2 years ago after a training accident that cost him the use of his left eye. Frank's working for Patton? Gets worse. According to my sources, Frank's the one who recruited several other discharged special operations guys for Richard's crew. They're not just guards, they're a private army. Neil felt the familiar cold settling over him, the same emotional shutdown that preceded his most difficult shots. Franklin Wiggins had saved his life in Fallujah and shared foxholes with him through 2 deployments. But Franklin had also chosen his side, and it wasn't Neil's. The McKenzie team arrived at noon in 3 unmarked vans. Andres McKenzie looked like an accountant, average height, thinning hair, wire-rimmed glasses. But his eyes held the same predatory intelligence Neil recognized in mirrors. Mr. Weeks, I've reviewed your mother's files on this situation. Quite comprehensive. She anticipated several scenarios for resolving this matter. Neil led McKenzie to Margaret's basement office, where maps of Patton's compound covered every surface. Red lines marked entry points. Blue circles indicated security cameras. Yellow triangles showed guard positions. What did she recommend? McKenzie spread additional diagrams across the table. Your mother favored surgical strikes over brute force. She identified 17 points of failure in Patton's operation: financial, legal, personal, and operational. Her plan was to attack all 17 simultaneously, creating chaos that would force Patton into mistakes. I don't have time for 17-point plans. They're moving tonight. Then we accelerate the timeline. Mackenzie's smile was thin and professional. Your mother also provided contingency plans for immediate action. Tell me, Mr. Weeks, how committed are you to keeping your hands clean? Neil thought about Ryan's terrified voice, about Margaret's warning about chemical weapons, about the weight of protecting innocent lives versus the luxury of moral absolutes. My hands haven't been clean since I joined the Navy. What do you need me to do? The plan Mackenzie outlined was elegant in its simplicity. While law enforcement was notoriously slow to act on international arms trafficking, they responded much faster to immediate threats involving child endangerment and domestic terrorism. All they needed was sufficient evidence to justify immediate action. Your mother already gathered most of the evidence, Mackenzie explained. Financial records proving illegal arms sales, communications between Patton and known terrorist organizations, shipping manifests for prohibited weapons components. The only missing piece is connecting Patton directly to an active threat against American targets. The chemical weapons shipment tonight. Exactly. If we can document Patton personally overseeing the transfer of chemical weapons to Ahmad Hassan's cell, law enforcement will have no choice but to act immediately. Neil studied the compound layout again. Getting close enough for video evidence means getting inside their security perimeter. Your mother anticipated that as well. Mackenzie opened a case containing high-end surveillance equipment, micro cameras, directional microphones, real-time transmission capabilities. But the equipment requires someone with advanced tactical training to deploy it effectively. Someone who can move through hostile territory undetected. Someone who can make the impossible shot when everything depends on it. As evening approached, Neil prepared his gear with the methodical precision of a man preparing for war. Black tactical clothing, night vision equipment, communications gear, and his custom rifle, a .308 Winchester that had never missed its target across 3 deployments. But this mission wasn't about killing. It was about saving his son and exposing the truth. The killing, if necessary, would come later. Jerry and the Mackenzie team would provide overwatch and communications support. Local FBI contacts, alerted by Margaret's network, would be standing by to act on any evidence Neil could provide. Everything depended on documenting Patton's involvement in the weapons transfer. As Neil checked his equipment one final time, Penny Weeks appeared in the basement doorway. Your grandfather would be proud, she said quietly. He always said the hardest battles are the ones where you fight for family against people you once trusted. Did he ever have to fight friends? In Korea, his best friend turned black market profiteer, selling medical supplies while American soldiers died from treatable wounds. Your grandfather tried reasoning with him first. What happened? Penny's smile was cold as winter. Some people mistake mercy for weakness. They only understand strength. Your grandfather made sure his friend understood. Neil shouldered his rifle and kissed his grandmother's cheek. I'll bring Ryan home. I know you will. And Neil, your mother left one more thing for you. She handed him a small device that looked like a garage door opener. Insurance policy. If things go very badly tonight, press the button. Your mother spent 40 years preparing for the possibility that her work might endanger her family. Neil didn't ask what the device would do. Some questions were better left unanswered until the moment you needed to know. Chapter 5. Into the Lion's Den. The drainage tunnel beneath Patton's compound smelled of rust and decades-old concrete. Neil moved through the darkness like a shadow, every step calculated to avoid the motion sensors he knew would be positioned along the route. The tunnel emerged near the compound's eastern wall, exactly where Jerry's intelligence had indicated. Through his night vision scope, Neil could see the guards making their rounds. Franklin Wiggins was easy to identify despite the eye patch. His distinctive gait and the way he favored his left shoulder made him stand out. For other guards patrolled the perimeter, their routes overlapping in a pattern designed to eliminate blind spots. But patterns could be predicted, and predictions could be exploited. Neil waited until the guards completed 2 full rotations, timing each segment to the second. A 15-second window existed between guard changes at the loading dock, just enough time for someone with his training to slip inside. The warehouse interior was a maze of shipping containers and military equipment. Neil recognized some of the hardware from his deployments: communications gear, body armor, weapons that were supposed to be destroyed rather than sold. But the containers in the center of the warehouse were what drew his attention. Through his scope, Neil could see Arabic markings and hazard symbols that made his blood run cold. Margaret had been right about the chemical weapons. Overwatch, this is Eagle 7. I have eyes on the primary target. Confirm presence of prohibited materials. Jerry's voice crackled through his earpiece. Copy, Eagle 7. FBI task force is standing by. We need positive identification of principal subjects and evidence of criminal activity. Neil moved closer, using the shipping containers as cover. In the warehouse office, visible through reinforced glass windows, he could see Colleen sitting with Ryan. His son looked pale and frightened, clutching a stuffed animal Neil had sent him from Afghanistan. The sight of his child in that place, surrounded by weapons and criminals, ignited something primal in Neil's chest. But he forced the emotion down, maintaining the cold focus that had kept him alive through countless missions. Richard Patton's voice echoed through the warehouse as he entered through the main doors, accompanied by 3 men in expensive suits who had the bearing of international arms dealers. Gentlemen, welcome to Patton Security Solutions. I think you'll find our inventory meets all your specifications. Neil activated his recording equipment and moved to a position where he could capture both video and audio evidence. The conversation that followed confirmed his worst fears. The chemical components are exactly what Ahmad requested, Richard was saying, pointing to the marked containers. Binary agents that are undetectable separately but become lethal when combined. Perfect for the soft targets he has in mind. One of the buyers, speaking with a Middle Eastern accent, examined shipping labels. These serial numbers indicate American military stock. Very impressive. Our buyer will pay premium for authentic materials. My sources in the Pentagon have been very cooperative, Richard replied. Amazing what military wives will tell their husbands' business partners when they think they're in love. Neil's finger tightened on his rifle's trigger. The bastard was admitting to using Colleen to gain intelligence about American military operations. But he needed more evidence, needed Richard to incriminate himself completely. Franklin Wiggins entered the warehouse, approaching Richard with obvious concern. Boss, we've got a problem. Motion sensors picked up movement in the drainage tunnel. Could be nothing, but could be Neil, Richard finished, his voice turning cold. I wondered when he'd show up. Frank, take a team and sweep the perimeter. If you find him, bring him here alive. I want him to watch what happens to traitors' families. Neil's position was compromised, but he'd gathered enough evidence to trigger law enforcement action. He activated his emergency beacon, signaling Jerry to alert the FBI task force. But as he prepared to extract, Ryan's terrified scream echoed through the warehouse. Through the office window, Neil saw Colleen struggling with one of Richard's men while Ryan huddled in the corner. Whatever was happening, his son was in immediate danger. The choice between mission completion and family protection wasn't really a choice at all. Neil moved from concealment, advancing toward the office with deadly purpose. His rifle tracked targets with mechanical precision, Franklin leading a search team, Richard negotiating with arms dealers, guards positioned throughout the warehouse. The first shot took out the lights, plunging the warehouse into darkness broken only by emergency lighting. The second shot destroyed the main communications array, cutting off external contact. This is Eagle 7, Neil transmitted to Jerry. I'm going tactical. Execute the insurance policy if I don't report back in 30 minutes. He switched to night vision and became what 3 deployments had trained him to be, a ghost in the dark, hunting men who had made the mistake of threatening his family. Franklin's voice echoed through the warehouse. Neil, I know you're in here. Let's talk this through like soldiers. Neil's response came in the form of a precisely placed shot that shattered a spotlight inches from Franklin's head. The message was clear. There would be no talking. The hunt had begun. Chapter 6, Predator and Prey. Neil moved through the darkened warehouse like death itself, using shadows and shipping containers to mask his approach. His night vision gave him a decisive advantage, but Franklin and his team weren't amateurs. They adapted quickly, using disciplined fire and movement tactics to systematically clear the warehouse. Spread out, Franklin commanded. He's got night vision, but he's 1 man against 6. Box him in and force him into the open. But Franklin was thinking like a soldier, not like a predator. Neil wasn't trying to hold territory or eliminate all threats. He had one objective: reach his son, and extract him safely. Everything else was secondary. A guard moved too close to Neil's position, and Neil struck with silent efficiency. The man dropped unconscious, his weapon and radio disappearing into the darkness. One by one, Neil reduced their numbers while remaining invisible. Richard's voice echoed from the office area. "Neil, I know you can hear me. Come out now, or your son pays the price." Through his scope, Neil could see Richard holding a pistol while Colleen pleaded with him to let Ryan go. The child was pressed against the far wall, tears streaming down his face. Neil had clear shots at Richard through the office windows, but the angle was wrong. Any missed shot could endanger Ryan, and even a successful shot might trigger a reflexive response that could harm his son. He needed a different approach. "Franklin," Neil called out, his voice echoing from multiple directions as he used the warehouse acoustics to mask his position. "You want to talk? Let's talk about why you're helping a man who sells weapons to terrorists." "Neil, you don't understand the full situation," Franklin replied, his voice strained. "Richard's operation isn't what you think." "I understand perfectly." Neil's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Richard's selling American military equipment to Ahmad Hassan's cell. Equipment they plan to use against American targets. And you're helping him do it." A pause. Then Franklin's voice, quieter. "The chemical weapons, those aren't for sale. Richard told us they were for disposal. Look around you, Frank. Use your eyes. Those containers are marked for shipment, not disposal. How much did he pay you to forget everything you swore to protect?" Neil was gambling that Franklin's loyalty to Richard was based on lies, that his former teammates still had enough honor left to choose the right side when confronted with the truth. The gamble paid off. "Stand down," Franklin shouted to his remaining men. "Weapons down now." "Franklin, what the hell are you doing?" Richard's voice carried clearly from the office. "I'm remembering who I used to be," Franklin replied, moving toward the office area. "Before I let money make me forget my oath." Richard's response was a muzzle flash as he fired through the office window. Franklin dove for cover, but not quickly enough. The shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into a shipping container. "Anyone else want to develop a conscience?" Richard snarled. That was the moment Neil had been waiting for. With Richard focused on Franklin and his back to the main warehouse, Neil had a clear approach to the office area. He moved with lethal silence, reaching the office door as Richard was reloading. Through the reinforced glass, Neil could see Colleen shielding Ryan with her body while Richard advanced on them both. "This is all your husband's fault," Richard was telling Colleen. "If he'd just stayed away, if he'd just accepted that his family didn't want him anymore, none of this would be necessary." Neil's hand found the door handle. Locked, but the lock was standard commercial grade. A sharp kick would breach it, but the noise would alert Richard and potentially provoke him into shooting hostages. Instead, Neil used a technique learned from 3 years of infiltrating enemy positions. He picked the lock in 30 seconds, opened the door soundlessly, and stepped inside behind Richard like a ghost materializing from darkness. "Put the gun down, Richard." Richard spun around, his face going white as he found himself staring down the barrel of Neil's rifle. For a moment, the warehouse was absolutely silent except for Ryan's quiet sobbing. "Daddy!" Ryan broke free from Colleen's arms and ran toward Neil. "Stay back, Ryan," Neil commanded gently, never taking his eyes off Richard. "Daddy's working right now." Richard's hand shook as he kept his pistol trained on Colleen. "You shoot me, I shoot her. Mexican standoff, Neil. What's it going to be?" Neil's smile was cold as Arctic wind. "You're assuming I care if she lives." The words hit Colleen like a physical blow. Her eyes widened as she realized that the man she'd betrayed, the husband she'd dismissed, was perfectly capable of writing her off as an acceptable loss. "Neil, please," she whispered. "I made a mistake. I was scared and lonely and—" "You were a grown woman who made choices," Neil replied, his rifle never wavering from Richard's center mass. "You chose to believe his lies. You chose to betray our marriage. You chose to put our son in danger. You chose to work with a man who sells weapons to terrorists." Richard backed toward the office window, dragging Colleen with him. "You're not going to shoot, Neil. You're too much of a Boy Scout. Too much honor, too much conscience. That's always been your weakness." Neil's finger moved to the trigger. "You're right. I am honorable. That's why I'm going to give you exactly 10 seconds to release my son's mother and surrender. And if I don't, Then I'm going to show you what honor looks like when it's protecting family from vermin. The count began. 10. Richard's eyes darted around the office, looking for escape routes that didn't exist. 9. Outside the office, Neil could hear sirens approaching. Jerry had called in the FBI task force. 8. Richard pressed his gun harder against Colleen's temple. I'll kill her, Neil. I swear I'll. 7. Neil's scope centered on Richard's forehead, the same precision that had eliminated 127 threats across 3 deployments. 6. Richard's nerve broke. He shoved Colleen away and dove toward the window, trying to escape into the warehouse. But Neil had anticipated the move. 5. The shot took Richard in the knee, sending him crashing to the floor, his weapon skittering away across the concrete. Neil lowered his rifle and opened his arms. Come here, Ryan. His son ran to him, small arms wrapping around Neil's neck with desperate strength. For the first time in 18 months, Neil felt complete. I knew you'd come, Daddy, Ryan whispered against his ear. I knew you'd save me. Neil held his son close and looked at Colleen, who was pressed against the office wall, staring at him with a mixture of fear and something that might have been regret. The FBI will be here in 2 minutes, Neil told her quietly. You're going to tell them everything Richard made you do, everything he threatened, everything he promised. You're going to cooperate completely with their investigation. And then what? She asked. Neil's eyes were empty of warmth or forgiveness. Then you're going to disappear from our lives forever. You made your choice, Colleen. Now you get to live with it. As federal agents swarmed the warehouse, Neil carried his son toward the exit, stepping over Richard's writhing form without a glance. The man who had tried to steal his family was no longer worth his attention. The real reckoning was yet to come. Chapter 7. The reckoning begins. 3 weeks after the warehouse raid, Neil sat in a federal courtroom watching Richard Patton's empire crumble. The evidence Margaret had gathered, combined with what Neil had documented during the raid, painted a picture of an international arms trafficking operation that stretched across 4 continents. Richard was facing charges of terrorism, arms trafficking, conspiracy, and kidnapping. The chemical weapons found in his warehouse were confirmed to be components for sarin gas, intended for an attack on 3 American shopping centers during the Christmas season. Ahmad Hassan's cell had been planning to kill thousands of innocent civilians. But Neil's attention wasn't on Richard. His focus was on Colleen, sitting in the witness box under oath, finally telling the truth about her involvement in the operation. Mr. Patton told me that my husband was unstable, she testified, her voice barely audible. He said Neil was suffering from PTSD and might become dangerous when he returned from deployment. He convinced me that cooperating with his business would protect my son. The federal prosecutor, a sharp woman named Vicki Pennington, pressed for details. What specific information did you provide to Mr. Patton? Neil's deployment schedule, his security clearances, the names of his military contacts. Richard said he needed the information to monitor threats against military families. Did you ever suspect that Mr. Patton was using this information for illegal purposes? Colleen's eyes found Neil's across the courtroom. He stared back without expression, his face as cold as stone. Not until it was too late. When I tried to end the relationship, Richard threatened to hurt Ryan if I didn't continue cooperating. Neil knew she was lying. The recordings Jerry had captured proved that Colleen had been a willing participant until the very end, motivated by money and the promise of a new life rather than fear. But her cooperation was securing convictions that would put Richard and his associates away for life. That was all that mattered for now. After the hearing, Neil walked out of the courthouse with Ryan's hand in his. His son had been staying with Penny while the legal proceedings unfolded, but today marked the beginning of their new life together. Daddy, is Mommy going to jail too? Ryan asked as they reached Neil's truck. Mommy's going to go away for a while, Neil said carefully. But you and I are going to be fine. We're going to live with great-grandma Penny and fix up the farm. Ryan seemed to accept this explanation. At 4 years old, he understood that his world had changed dramatically, but he trusted his father to keep him safe. As they drove toward the farmhouse, Neil's phone rang. Jerry's name appeared on the display. Turn on the news, Jerry said without preamble. Channel 7. Neil pulled over and switched on the radio. The news anchor's voice filled the truck. In a shocking development, Patton Security Solutions CEO Richard Patton was found dead in his federal holding cell this morning. Initial reports suggest suicide, but federal investigators are treating it as a potential homicide. Neil felt no surprise, no satisfaction, no emotion at all. Richard's death simplified certain aspects of the situation, but it didn't change the fundamental reality. His marriage was over, his family was destroyed, and his son would grow up knowing that his mother had betrayed them all. "Daddy, are you sad?" Ryan asked, studying his father's expression. "No, buddy. Daddy's not sad. Daddy's just thinking about the future." That evening, Neil sat on the farmhouse porch with Penny, watching Ryan play with the dog in the front yard. The scene was peaceful, domestic, normal. But Neil knew it was built on foundations of violence and betrayal that would never fully heal. "You're planning something," Penny observed. "I can see it in your eyes. The same look your grandfather had when he came back from Korea." Neil didn't deny it. "Colleen will testify, get her immunity deal, and disappear into witness protection. She'll get a new identity, a new life, and a clean slate. And that bothers you. She betrayed her country, endangered our son, and helped arm terrorists. In 6 months, she'll be living comfortably under a new name while the families of Richard's victims are still burying their dead." Penny rocked slowly in her chair, studying her grandson's profile. "Justice and revenge aren't the same thing, Neil. I know the difference, Grandma. But sometimes the law isn't enough. And sometimes revenge destroys the man seeking it more than it hurts his enemies." Neil considered this. Ryan deserves to grow up knowing that actions have consequences. That betrayal isn't something you walk away from without paying a price. Ryan deserves to grow up with a father who isn't consumed by hate. He'll have that father. But first, I'm going to finish what Mom started. Neil pulled out Margaret's files, which contained detailed dossiers on 17 other military contractors operating similar schemes. Richard's operation had been just one tentacle of a larger network that preyed on military families and sold American secrets to the highest bidders. Mom spent 3 years building cases against all of them, Neil explained. Richard's arrest was supposed to trigger a domino effect that would bring down the entire network. But with him dead, the others are scrambling to cover their tracks. "So you're going to help them along?" Neil smiled for the first time in weeks. "I'm going to complete Mom's mission, one target at a time, until every last one of them pays for what they've done." Penny was quiet for a long moment, watching Ryan chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Your grandfather always said that the hardest part of any war is knowing when it's over. This war isn't over, Grandma. It's just beginning." That night, after Ryan was asleep, Neil descended to Margaret's basement office and began planning the systematic destruction of 17 criminal enterprises. Each operation would be perfectly legal, using Margaret's intelligence network and documented evidence to expose crimes that law enforcement had failed to detect. But the men behind those crimes would discover that some forms of justice operated outside the courtroom, and some reckonings couldn't be avoided by hiring expensive lawyers or disappearing into witness protection programs. Neil Weeks was going to war again. This time, the battlefield was American soil, and the enemy had made the fatal mistake of threatening his family. Chapter 8. The Network Falls. 6 months later, Neil stood in another federal courthouse, this time in Detroit, watching the third major arms trafficking ring collapse under the weight of evidence Margaret had assembled years earlier. The defendant's table was occupied by Brian Lamb, a former Army colonel who had been selling military-grade night vision equipment to insurgent groups in Syria. Neil's methodical campaign against Margaret's target list had been devastatingly effective. Using his mother's intelligence network and Andres Mackenzie's resources, he had orchestrated the downfall of 12 criminal enterprises in 6 months. Each operation appeared completely legal: anonymous tips to law enforcement, leaked documents to investigative journalists, financial audits triggered by suspicious transactions. But Neil's enemies knew they were being hunted. Mr. Weeks. The voice belonged to Vincent Hanna, a man who appeared in Margaret's files as both ally and threat. Hanna had been CIA for 20 years before going private, and his current loyalties were unclear. Neil didn't turn around. "Mr. Hanna, you've been busy since your mother's funeral. 12 arrests, 8 convictions so far, millions in seized assets. Margaret would be proud. Is there a point to this conversation?" Hanna moved to stand beside Neil at the courtroom railing. "The point is that you've made powerful enemies. The remaining names on your mother's list aren't small-time operators like Richard Patton. They're connected, protected, and very dangerous." Neil finally looked at Hanna. "Are you warning me or threatening me? I'm offering you a choice. Walk away now, take your son, and disappear. My organization can provide new identities, protection, a chance at a normal life. In exchange for what? In exchange for forgetting about the 5 names left on your list. Neil studied Hannah's face, reading the subtext behind the offer. You're working for them. I'm working for stability. The men you're targeting control significant portions of American intelligence operations. Their removal would create power vacuums that our enemies would rush to fill. Those men are traitors who sell American secrets to terrorists. Those men are necessary evils in a complex world that doesn't always allow for moral absolutes. Neil's smile was thin and dangerous. Mr. Hannah, I spent 3 years killing people for moral absolutes. I'm not going to stop now because someone finds it inconvenient. As Neil walked away, Hannah called after him. Your son is 4 years old, Mr. Weeks. Is your revenge really worth making him an orphan? That evening, Neil returned to the farmhouse to find Jeremiah Salas waiting in the kitchen with a tactical vest and an assault rifle. Jerry's face was grim, professional, the expression of a soldier preparing for combat. We've got company coming, Jerry announced. Mackenzie's sources picked up chatter about a contract on your head. 3 teams, military trained, arriving tonight. Neil looked through the kitchen window, toward the barn where Ryan was helping Penny feed the horses. His son was laughing, completely unaware that his father's war had finally come home. How long do we have? Maybe an hour. I've got 4 men positioned around the property, but these aren't amateurs. They'll have superior numbers and equipment. Neil descended to Margaret's basement and activated systems his grandmother had shown him weeks earlier. Hidden throughout the farmhouse were surveillance cameras, motion sensors, and defensive measures that Margaret had installed during her CIA years. Jerry, get Ryan and Grandma to the safe room. Lock it down and don't come out until I give the all clear. Neil, you can't take on 3 teams by yourself. I'm not by myself. Neil indicated the array of monitors showing the farmhouse's defensive perimeter. Mom left me everything I need. As Jerry evacuated Ryan and Penny to the underground safe room Margaret had constructed decades earlier, Neil transformed the farmhouse into a fortress. Motion-activated floodlights, automated weapons systems, communication jammers. Margaret's paranoia had created the perfect killing ground. The first assault team approached from the south, moving with the disciplined precision of special operations veterans. Neil watched them advance through thermal imaging cameras, counting weapons, identifying equipment, planning his response. These men weren't here to arrest him. They were here to eliminate a threat to their employer's criminal enterprises. Neil's response was swift and devastating. Remotely activated Claymore mines eliminated the first team's advanced scouts. Automated machine gun emplacements forced the remaining attackers into predetermined kill zones. Within 15 minutes, Team 1 was completely neutralized. Teams 2 and 3 adapted quickly, using explosives to breach the house's outer defenses and advancing under cover of smoke grenades. But they were fighting on ground Neil had studied for months, against systems designed by a woman who had survived 40 years in the intelligence world by being more paranoid than her enemies. The battle raged for 2 hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. When dawn broke over the farmhouse, Neil stood alone among the bodies of 15 men who had made the mistake of threatening his family. As he surveyed the aftermath, Neil's phone buzzed with a text message from Vincent Hannah. Point taken. The remaining names on your list have been forwarded to federal authorities. Your mother's work is complete. Neil deleted the message without responding. Hannah could claim credit for the arrests if it helped him save face with his superiors. The important thing was that Margaret's mission was finally finished. Ryan emerged from the safe room later that morning, after Jerry had cleared the evidence of the night's battle. To the 4-year-old, it looked like his father had simply been working on farm projects. Did you fix everything, Daddy? Ryan asked, wrapping his small arms around Neil's leg. Neil lifted his son and looked out across the farmland that had belonged to their family for 4 generations. The war was over. The enemies were defeated. The future stretched ahead like an empty highway. Yes, buddy. Daddy fixed everything. Chapter 9. The Price of Victory. 2 years had passed since the night Vincent Hannah's mercenaries died on the Weeks family farm. The official story, carefully crafted by federal investigators, attributed the incident to a gang war between rival arms dealers. Neil's name never appeared in any reports. The remaining criminals on Margaret's list had been quietly arrested over the following months. Some pleaded guilty to avoid trials that would expose the full scope of their operations. Others simply disappeared, their fates known only to the intelligence agencies that had finally decided they were more liability than asset. Neil stood in the kitchen of the renovated farmhouse, watching 6-year-old Ryan feed chickens in the backyard. His son had grown into a confident, happy child who knew nothing of the violence that had shaped his early years. That ignorance was Neil's greatest victory. The legal proceedings had concluded 18 months ago. Colleen had fulfilled her cooperation agreement and vanished into witness protection. Neil had received divorce papers signed by a woman whose new name he would never know. She was legally dead to them, which felt appropriate. "Package for you," Penny announced, entering the kitchen with a thick manila envelope. At 86, she was still sharp, still observant, still protective of her family. Neil recognized the return address, Hannah Strategic Consulting. He opened the envelope and found a single photograph and a brief note. The photograph showed Colleen sitting at a cafe in what looked like a European city. She had changed her hair color and style, but her face was unmistakable. She looked older, harder, but alive and apparently healthy. The note was brief. "She's working as a translator for an NGO in Prague. Married name is Sarah Mitchell. Thought you should know she's using the languages you paid for her to learn. V.H." Neil studied the photograph for a long moment, then walked to the kitchen fireplace and dropped it into the flames. He watched his ex-wife's image curl and blacken and disappear into ash. "Second chances," Penny observed from behind him. "Some people don't deserve them." "I wasn't talking about her." Neil turned to face his grandmother, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You think I should move on? Find someone new? I think a 6-year-old boy needs to see his father building something instead of destroying things. You've spent 2 years finishing your mother's work, completing your grandfather's legacy, honoring your family's obligations. When do you start living for yourself?" Through the window, Neil could see Ryan playing with a puppy they'd adopted from the local shelter. His son was laughing, completely absorbed in the simple joy of childhood. The boy had no memory of his mother's betrayal, no knowledge of his father's war against the criminal networks that had threatened their family. That ignorance was precious. It was the foundation of the normal life Neil had fought to protect. "There's a teacher at Ryan's school," Neil said quietly. "Marina Chung. She's been asking if I'd like to have coffee sometime." Penny smiled. "And what have you been telling her?" "That I'm not ready for complications." "Are you ready now?" Neil considered the question. For 2 years, he had lived for vengeance, justice, and the systematic elimination of threats to his family. Those missions were complete. Margaret's enemies were defeated, her intelligence networks had been transferred to legitimate agencies, and her files had been sealed in government vaults. The war was over. It was time to learn how to live in peacetime. "Yeah," Neil said finally. "I think maybe I am." That evening, Neil helped Ryan with his homework at the kitchen table where he had once planned the destruction of 17 criminal enterprises. The contrast wasn't lost on him. The same space where he had studied enemy positions now hosted discussions of spelling tests and multiplication tables. "Daddy, why don't I have a mommy like other kids?" Ryan asked, not looking up from his math problems. It was a question Neil had been dreading and preparing for since the day Colleen disappeared. "Some families are different, buddy. Some kids live with their moms, some live with their dads, some live with grandparents. What matters is that the people who love you take care of you." "Do you think my mommy loves me?" Neil felt something twist in his chest, not anger anymore, but something sadder and more complex. "I think your mommy loved you the best way she knew how. But sometimes people make choices that take them away from the people they love." Ryan nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense to him. "Ms. Chung said her daddy had to go away when she was little too. But she turned out okay." "You've been talking to Ms. Chung about your family?" "She asked why you never come to the school events." "I told her you're shy." Neil laughed despite himself. "Shy? Well, you never talk to the other parents. And you always look like you're watching for bad guys." Old habits died hard. Neil realized he had been treating every school function like a potential combat zone, automatically cataloging exits, identifying threats, positioning himself for maximum tactical advantage. The other parents probably thought he was antisocial or paranoid. "Maybe I should work on that," Neil said. "Maybe you should ask Ms. Chung to have dinner with us," Ryan suggested with the subtle manipulation that only 6-year-olds could master. "I think she's lonely too." That weekend, Neil found himself sitting across from Marina Chung at a small cafe in town, feeling more nervous than he had during any military operation. Marina was intelligent, kind, and patient with his obvious discomfort around civilian social interactions. "Ryan says you used to be a soldier," she said over coffee and sandwiches. "Something like that. He's very proud of you. He tells anyone who'll listen that his daddy is a hero." Neil shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not a hero. I just did my job." Marina studied his face with the perceptive eyes of someone who had spent years working with children and their families. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. But you should know that whatever you've been through, whatever you've had to do, it doesn't define your worth as a person or as a father." For the first time in years, Neil felt something inside his chest unclench. The constant vigilance, the perpetual anger, the need to remain always ready for the next battle. All of it seemed suddenly exhausting. "I've been angry for a long time," he admitted. "At my ex-wife, at the people who hurt my family, at myself for not seeing it coming. I'm tired of being angry." "Anger's not always a bad thing," Marina said gently. "Sometimes it protects us when we need protection. But eventually, we have to decide if we want to keep carrying it or if we want to set it down and carry something else instead." Neil looked out the cafe window toward the town square, where families were enjoying a pleasant Saturday afternoon. Normal people living normal lives, unmarked by violence or betrayal or the need for constant vigilance. He wanted that. For himself, for Ryan, for whatever future they might build together. "I'd like to try," he said finally. "Setting it down, I mean. I'm not sure I remember how to be normal, but I'd like to try." Marina smiled. "Normal is overrated. But peaceful? Peaceful is worth working toward." As they walked back to their cars, Neil felt lighter than he had in years. The weight of his mother's mission, his grandfather's legacy, and his own need for justice had been lifted from his shoulders. Behind them, the ghosts of Margaret Weeks and all the battles fought in her name faded into memory. Ahead lay the possibility of redemption, healing, and perhaps even happiness. Neil Weeks was finally ready to come home from the war. But some victories, he was learning, were harder to win than others. The most difficult battle wasn't against enemy soldiers or criminal networks or treacherous wives. The hardest fight was against the part of himself that had learned to find purpose in conflict and meaning in vengeance. That battle would take time. But for the first time since that devastating phone call in Afghanistan, Neil believed it was a war he could actually win. Ryan was waiting by the truck when Neil returned, having spent the afternoon with Penny at the farmer's market. His son's face was bright with excitement and chocolate ice cream. "Did you ask her?" Ryan demanded immediately. "Ask her what?" "To be part of our family." Neil laughed and lifted his son into the truck. "It's a little early for that, buddy. But I did ask her to have dinner with us next week." "Good," Ryan said with the satisfaction of a successful matchmaker. "I think we're ready for something good to happen." As they drove back to the farmhouse, Neil realized his son was right. They had survived betrayal, violence, and loss. They had honored the dead and defeated their enemies. They had protected what mattered most and built something stable from the wreckage of their old life. Now, finally, they were ready for something good to happen. The war was over. The healing could begin. Epilogue. 5 years later, Neil Weeks stood at the altar of St. Mary's Catholic Church, watching Marina Chung walk down the aisle in a simple white dress. 11-year-old Ryan served as best man, beaming with pride at his role in bringing his father and soon-to-be stepmother together. In the front pew, 91-year-old Penny Weeks dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, finally seeing her grandson choose joy over justice, love over vengeance. The church was full of friends and neighbors, the normal community connections that Neil had never bothered to build during his years of war. Marina had taught him that strength could be found in vulnerability, that true courage sometimes meant choosing to trust again. As they exchanged vows, Neil thought briefly of Margaret Weeks, who would have loved to see this day. Her mission was complete, her enemies defeated, her family safe and thriving. The intelligence networks she had built were now serving legitimate purposes, and the criminals she had tracked were serving life sentences or deeper justice. There were no more names on any lists. No more wrongs to right, no more battles to fight. For the first time in his adult life, Neil Weeks was simply a man in love, promising to build a future instead of settling debts from the past. When Father Potter pronounced them husband and wife, Ryan cheered louder than anyone. The boy who had once cowered in a criminal's warehouse was now a confident young man who had learned that families could be destroyed and rebuilt, that love was stronger than betrayal, and that some stories really did have happy endings. As they left the church, Neil and Marina were pelted with rice and flower petals by friends who knew nothing of the blood that had been spilled to make this moment possible. The past was buried with the dead. The future stretched ahead, clean and bright, and full of promise. Neil Weeks had finally come home from all his wars, but he kept his rifle cleaned and ready, just in case. After all, some lessons learned in blood should never be forgotten.